Hitler conquered most of Europe, but when Allied forces came to seize his property, they discovered something strange. The dictator who took everything from millions of people owned almost nothing himself. One house, that's it. Not the Eagle's Nest, not the Munich apartment, not the massive compound in the Bavarian Alps. All of it belonged to the Nazi Party, not to the man who lived there. But here's what makes this story truly bizarre. What happened to that property after the war reveals a deliberate erasure so complete that most people have no idea the Berghof was demolished on the exact anniversary of Hitler's death, or why one Nazi building was mysteriously spared. The fortune built on forced reading. Hitler purchased his mountain retreat in 1933, using royalties from Mein Kampf, approximately $1 million annually at its peak. The property was called Haus Wachenfeld, a modest alpine cottage that he would eventually transform into the sprawling Berghof complex. On paper, this was a private purchase made with private funds. But here's the darker truth those royalties obscured. The money came from state-mandated distribution. Copies of Mein Kampf were given as wedding gifts to newlywed couples across Germany. Schools required it as reading material. Government offices purchased it in bulk. Hitler's so-called personal wealth was extracted through the same persecution machinery he built to control the country. Every Reichsmark that funded his mountain retreat came from a system designed to force his ideology into German homes. The Berghof, while technically a personal purchase, was built on coerced revenue from a captive population. Meanwhile, Hitler's private secretary Martin Bormann was conducting a quieter expansion. Using Nazi party funds, he bought up more than 650 surrounding properties through threats and forced sales, creating a militarized compound that Hitler didn't technically own. 42 buildings in total, over 120 million Reichsmarks invested. More than 650 residents displaced from their homes, some families who had lived in those alpine villages for generations. All of it belonged to the Nazi Party. Hitler simply lived there. The man who presented himself as Germany's modest servant had access to an empire of stolen land while maintaining the fiction that he owned almost nothing. The apartment he never paid for. The Munich apartment tells the same story in miniature. The famous 9-room residence at Prinzregentenplatz 16, where Hitler lived throughout his rise to power, where his niece Gaily Raubal died under mysterious circumstances, where American photographer Lee Miller would later take one of history's most iconic images, wasn't even his. Hitler rented the apartment in 1929. The Nazi Party purchased the entire building in 1935 or 1936 and simply let him continue living there rent-free. The Führer myth depended on appearing ordinary while having access to everything. Albert Speer, Hitler's chief architect, later described the furnishings as the room of a man of average income, perhaps of a branch manager of a bank. But one room in that apartment revealed something the modest furniture tried to hide. Hitler maintained Gaily's bedroom exactly as it had been when she died in 1931. Her photograph on the wall, her belongings untouched. He visited annually on the anniversary of her death, turning a rental apartment into a private shrine. The dictator who claimed to sacrifice everything for Germany had carved out this one space for personal grief, preserved within a building he let the party purchase so he wouldn't have to. Before we see how the Allied forces eventually came to dismantle this entire empire of illusions with 400 tons of explosives, a quick request. If you enjoy uncovering these dark, hidden corners of history that textbooks often skip, please hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep these deep dives coming. 400 tons of bombs. April 25th, 1945. The war in Europe has 5 days left. American forces are closing on Munich. Soviet troops are fighting block by block through Berlin. The Third Reich is collapsing from every direction. But British Bomber Command makes an unusual decision. They send Lancaster bombers, including the legendary 617 Squadron, the Dambusters, to drop over 400 tons of ordnance on the Obersalzberg complex. More than 1,000 bombs falling on the mountains where Hitler built his retreat. The target wasn't strategic. There were no factories, no military installations worth mentioning, no troops massing for a counterattack. The RAF wanted to destroy everything Hitler had built in those mountains. The Berghof took direct hits. The surrounding buildings burned. The compound that Bormann had assembled through years of forced purchases was reduced to rubble and smoke. But here's what's strange. The Eagle's Nest survives untouched. Not a single bomb lands on the mountaintop lodge that party officials had built as Hitler's 50th birthday gift. The historical record doesn't clearly explain why. Was it a deliberate targeting decision? Spare the structure at 6,000 feet because the logistics of bombing it weren't worth the effort? An accidental omission in the chaos of the raid? The mystery of its survival would shape debates about Nazi heritage for decades to come. The fire that finished the job. May 4th, 1945. Hitler has been dead for 4 days. Germany's unconditional surrender is 72 hours away. Retreating SS troops reach the damaged Berghof. The RAF bombing had gutted sections of the building, but the structure still stood, walls intact, the shell recognizable as the mountain retreat where Hitler had received foreign dignitaries and plotted the destruction of Europe. Following orders that Hitler's properties should never fall into enemy hands, the SS soldiers set it ablaze. American forces arrived hours later to find the building still smouldering. The interior was destroyed, but enough remained to explore. French captain Laurent Tuillerat led one of the first teams into the underground bunker complex beneath the ruins. What they discovered revealed the accumulated possessions of a regime that had looted an entire continent. Thousands of bottles of wine, paintings from across occupied Europe, medical equipment, evening gowns, and bizarrely, a collection of bras that investigators attributed to Hermann Göring's unusual acquisitive habits. The chaos of collapse had scattered these possessions through tunnels and storerooms. The material evidence of Nazi excess now mixed with debris and ash. The Berghof's shell would stand for 7 more years, a burned-out monument that the new German government would have to decide what to do with. The anniversary they chose on purpose. April 30th, 1952. The Bavarian government has made an unprecedented decision about the Berghof's remains. Concentration camps like Dachau will be preserved as memorials. The sites of mass murder will stand as permanent witnesses to Nazi crimes, maintained so that future generations cannot claim ignorance about what happened there. But Hitler's personal luxury retreat? That gets explosives. The demolition crews detonate the charges on the exact 7th anniversary of Hitler's suicide. The timing cannot be coincidental. The state is erasing the physical manifestation of Nazi power on the precise date its architect died in his Berlin bunker. The demolition isn't just practical, it's symbolic. Bavaria is drawing a line between sites of victimhood, which deserve preservation, and sites of perpetrator comfort, which deserve erasure. The place where Hitler relaxed, entertained guests, and enjoyed the alpine views he'd stolen from displaced families would not become a pilgrimage destination. Today, almost nothing remains. Rear retaining walls stand overgrown with moss and vegetation, unmarked by any plaque or historical marker. If you hike to where the Berghof stood, you'll find deliberate anonymity. The landscape allowed to reclaim what the bombs and fire and explosives couldn't fully erase. This wasn't passive decay, this was intentional historical erasure, and Germany wanted it that way. The lodge that nobody demolished. But one structure defied the demolition consensus entirely. The Kehlstein house, known to Americans as the Eagle's Nest, somehow survives both the April bombing and the destruction order that followed. The mountaintop lodge sits at over 6,000 feet, accessible only by a tunnel blasted through the rock and an elevator that rises 400 feet through the mountain's core. Party officials built it as a 50th birthday gift for Hitler, though he visited only 14 times. He apparently feared the heights and found the thin mountain air uncomfortable. Eva Braun used it more than Hitler ever did, entertaining guests while the Führer stayed below at the Berghof. The structure was an amenity, not a command centre, a luxury perch with spectacular views that its intended recipient largely avoided. American forces took control of the Eagle's Nest after the German surrender and immediately recognised its tourist potential. By September 1945, they were charging 50 cents admission for soldiers to visit the site. The mountaintop lodge where Nazi officials had toasted Hitler's birthday became an attraction for the army that destroyed his regime. In 1960, the property transferred to a charitable trust. Today, the Kehlstein House operates as a restaurant and remains one of Germany's most visited Nazi-era tourist sites. Visitors can eat lunch and look out at the same alpine panorama that Hitler found too vertiginous to enjoy. The question persists across 8 decades. Why was this structure spared when the Berghof was deliberately erased? Logistics provide part of the answer. Demolishing a building at 6,000 feet requires significant engineering effort. Transporting explosives up the mountain road, managing debris removal in alpine terrain, all for a structure that was more trophy than threat. But the deeper answer reveals post-war Germany's unresolved tension about Nazi heritage. The same state that explosively erased Hitler's home now profits from tourists eating bratwurst at his birthday gift lodge. The police station solution? The Munich apartment survived through a different mechanism entirely. Instead of demolition, the Bavarian government converted the building at Prinzregentenplatz 16 into police headquarters. The second-floor apartment where Hitler lived throughout his rise to power, where Gailey's bedroom was preserved as a shrine he visited annually, where the furniture suggested a modest bank manager rather than a dictator. All of it is now file storage. The rooms are sealed to the public. No marker on the exterior identifies the building's history. Visitors can stand on the sidewalk below Hitler's former windows without any indication of what happened inside. The irony is precise. Bureaucratic paperwork now fills the rooms of a dictator who famously hated paperwork. The shrine problem solved not through destruction, but through institutional banality. Where Hitler once paced and plotted and mourned his dead niece, filing cabinets now hold police records. The apartment that the Nazi Party purchased to house its leader now serves the democratic state that replaced the regime. The masterpieces still missing. April 29th to 30th, 1945. As American forces close on Munich, something unexpected happens at the Führerbau, the Nazi Party headquarters, where Hitler had signed the Munich Agreement in 1938. The building housed paintings designated for Hitler's planned museum in Linz, his hometown in Austria. He had envisioned it as Europe's greatest art collection, assembled through systematic theft from Jewish families, conquered museums, and occupied nations. Approximately 700 paintings waited in the Führerbau as the war ended. But it wasn't organised troops who looted the collection first. It was desperate Munich civilians, breaking in during the chaos between German retreat and American arrival. Paintings disappeared into the city, grabbed by ordinary people seeking anything of value as their world collapsed. Then American forces arrived and looted what remained. This created a secondary dispossession. Art stolen from Jews and European museums was stolen again, scattered into private hands across Munich and beyond. The chain of theft that began with Nazi persecution ended with opportunistic chaos. 400 of those masterpieces remain missing today. only 22 have been positively identified in the 8 decades since. The Central Institute for Art History in Munich still accepts tips, but the trail is largely cold. Monuments man Edgar Breitenbach later lamented the missed opportunity. It's a pity that army regulations at that time did not permit the use of rewards in the form of food and cigarettes. This would almost certainly have been instrumental in recovering significant parts of the stolen collection. Somewhere in attics and basements and private collections, paintings that Hitler intended for his vanity museum remain hidden. The final unresolved theft in a regime built on taking what belonged to others. The photograph in Hitler's bathtub. April 30th, 1945. The same day Hitler shoots himself in his Berlin bunker, 600 kilometers away in his Munich apartment, something extraordinary happens. Vogue photographer Lee Miller has just come from documenting the liberation of Dachau concentration camp. The images she captured there, the bodies, the survivors, the industrial machinery of genocide, would haunt her for the rest of her life. She still wears boots covered in mud from the camp. In Hitler's apartment, she does something no demolition could achieve. She photographs herself emerging from Hitler's personal bathtub, a small statue of a nude woman on the ledge beside her, her muddy boots visible on the bath mat below. The conquered dictator's private space claimed by a woman, an artist, an American, a witness to his crimes. The image became iconic, symbolic reclamation that destruction could never accomplish. You can blow up the Berghof, convert the apartment to a police station, let the mountain retreat return to forest. But Lee Miller's photograph captures something different: the intimacy of invasion, the dictator's private space made public and transformed into art. The hate that kept paying. Here's the strangest post-war consequence of Hitler's minimal estate. His will left everything to the Nazi Party, which was abolished. With no valid heir, the state of Bavaria inherited his remaining assets. Among them, the copyright to Mein Kampf. For 70 years, Bavaria collected royalties on Hitler's manifesto. The state that demolished his mountain retreat, that converted his apartment to police offices, that worked to erase the physical evidence of his life, that same state profited from sales of his book. The revenue went to educational and social programs, turning Hitler's hate manifesto into an inadvertent funding source for the democracy that replaced him. When the copyright finally expired in 2015, the German government took control of publication rights. Today, only heavily annotated scholarly editions are authorized. The original text surrounded by historical context and critical commentary designed to diffuse its propaganda. The dictator's words finally no longer generate profit for anyone. What remains? Today, you can hike to where the Berghof stood. You'll find retaining walls covered in moss, barely visible through the overgrowth. No plaques mark the spot. No signs explain what happened there. The deliberate anonymity has largely succeeded. Tourists pass through without realizing they're walking where Hitler once welcomed Mussolini and planned the invasion of Poland. Then you can drive up the mountain to the Eagle's Nest, buy a meal at the restaurant, and look out at the same view Hitler avoided because it made him dizzy. The structure he barely used outlasted everything he actually valued. Meanwhile, in Munich, police officers walk past unmarked doors leading to sealed rooms where filing cabinets now stand where a dictator once grieved. The three fates of Hitler's real estate, erasure, commerce, and bureaucratic repurposing, reveal that Germany never settled on a single answer for what democracy should do with the architecture of tyranny. Should these sites be preserved as warnings? Demolished to prevent pilgrimage? Repurposed into something banal? The Bavarian government's answer wasn't one solution. It was 3 different choices for 3 different properties, each decision still debated 80 years later. the dictator who owned almost nothing, left behind questions about heritage and memory that we still haven't resolved. Thanks for watching History Hangover. If you found this video insightful, check out our other deep dives into what happened to Nazi figures and their families after the war. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next upload.